Coming up, a combination of two interviews that I did with co-leads of an 80s synth band that wrote several hits that defined the era. And here we find out that their 1984 hit was very well desired. The biggest icon on the planet at that moment wanted to record this song, but he wanted to change the lyrics. This 80s group declined, and instead of being on one of the biggest albums of all time, it became this band's debut hit single and put them on the map. The story is coming up on Professor of Rock. Hey music junkies, Professor of Rock, always here to celebrate the greatest artists and the greatest songs of all time. Join the community that we have built below by subscribing. You hit the red button, click the bell so you never miss an episode. The story straight from the legends. Make sure to check us out on Patreon for even more content. We just started a new show there. So I'm excited to bring you another episode from our series, Revelations. This is where featured artists go very deep into their greatest songs and albums. And on this installment of Revelations, we're going to go really deep on the 1984 classic, Dance Hall Days, by the one and only Wang Chung. Dance Hall Days. This was one of my favorite songs as a young lad growing up in Blackfoot, Idaho. I actually had a Wang Chung poster on my wall, and I bought their first record, Points on the Curve, with my allowance. So I was really excited to get the story behind this one because this song always meant a lot to me. This is actually a combination of two interviews I did. The first is with both Jack Hues and Nick Feldman, as before a show that they did in LA. And then the other one is a Zoom call that I did with Jack recently where I got to go even deeper. You listen to a song so many times and you really think you know it. I thought I knew this song back to front, but I learned a great deal from these interviews, including the fact that Michael Jackson very much wanted to record this song for Thriller. There's also a revelation here about Paul McCartney that's going to fascinate you. And as we go into this interview, I do want to thank our sponsor, Zenni Eyewear. The glasses I wear all the time. Add some style to your repertoire with blue light protection. You just go to the link below, design your own pair, and you can have them shipped right to your door. Here's Wang Chung. Dance Hall Days, #1 hit on the dance charts, and two different videos. I remember that video, the second video I believe that you did, it was up for the MTV Video Music Award. Because Derek Jarman did the first one. That's right. Intercut with all that World War II footage and stuff like that. And they're both great videos, but that second one, I still see it, and it takes me right back to MTV, Tell me about that record. Where did it come from, and what inspired it?
It's, I remember writing the beginnings of the song when I first left university. I got work teaching guitar in schools, and a kid didn't show up for his or her lesson, so I had this sort of 20-minute slot, and I came up with the sort of riff, the ding-a-ding-a-ding, and the bow-gow-gow. And the sense of take your baby by the hand. Do you know what I mean? It all kind of came to me really quite quickly, and I sort of jotted it down. And then I sort of noodled around with it, probably for a month or something, and then played it to Nick, and he was like, wow. I got from Nick that he was like, this is really good. Do you know what I mean? We've done things in the past that were good, but this is really good, And that happened with that song a lot. Do you know what I mean? We played it to our publishers, and they were suddenly like, let's go out for lunch. Do you know what I mean? They started to treat us really differently. Do you know what I mean? Started being nice to us. In a dance hall days. So that song always had this sense of, I was going to say magic, but it sort of hit about it as well.
Another, I think, interesting thing about it was, apart from the sort of composition, the actual, the melody and lyrics and the chords, it was the sort of, rhythmically, it was very interesting. The zing sort of beat, which is a kind of Burundi beat, which people like Joni Mitchell had used on Hissing of Summer Lawns album. Yeah. And then it was starting to become used by bands like Adam and the Ants, Bow Wow Wow and stuff, that whole and then, but that's sort of running through Dance Hall Days as well. There's that, and then underneath is the backbeat. We were cool on Christ. And I think that's had quite an effect, even subliminally, on people. They were like, hadn't quite heard anything like it before. So I think that really helped. Very infectious rhythm. Yeah. And we still feel it now when we play it. Yeah. Feel the audience responding to it.
Do the next thing that you feel.
the other great thing is that we recorded Points on the Curve, the whole album, at Abbey Road, you know. So as Beatles fans, that was
right.
amazing
I was
for
ask
us.
you about
You
that.
know.
To record the thing at Abbey Road and to have Chris Hues producing, who went on to do so many great records, Tears for Fears, songs from Big Chair. And it's like that record gave him a push to those other things because it's such a great record.
But the other great thing was that, you know, Paul McCartney lent us his bass.
Really?
Because my bass wasn't sounding quite right on the track. And he was in the studio next door. And the engineer, you know, said, I think I might be able to find you a left-handed bass. And Paul McCartney came in with holding the bass, pretending to be from the bass hire company.
Really?
And so I actually played his bass on Dance All Days.
Wow.
So that was amazing.
That is really cool.
It really was amazing.
Were you there when that happened?
I was, because he gave the bass to me in the first instance, you know, and I was just speechless. I couldn't speak at all. I wanted to tell him, you know, like, if it wasn't for you, I wouldn't be doing this, you know, but nothing came out of my mouth. You know.
Same with me, I was completely speechless. And then Linda McCartney came in and started chatting to the engineer, you know, catching up, hey, how's it going? You know? And I was sitting there with a bass, with this Yamaha bass of mine. I was like, just shut up, I want to play.
Well, you guys have very iconic voices. We were so in phase, you know, when I heard that, it almost staccato, you know, it was like, it begged for you to listen to those words and know what they meant. And like we were talking beforehand, it was Cool on Craze. I thought, is he saying Cool on Christ? And then it made me look at the lyrics and really want to find out the mystery behind the song. Yeah. It kind of has that old time, the video, you have that band, that kind of dance hall feel. Yeah. Did that come from your dad playing in bands and things?
I think it probably did, because he was in dance bands, you know, and I used to play in his band when I was like 12, 13 years old, you know. He used to let me come up and play bass and stuff and then a bit of guitar. And so, I think there was an element of that nostalgic thing in there as well,
I read somewhere that it was considered for Michael Jackson Thriller.
Yes,
Tell me about that.
Yeah.
It was after Off the Wall, obviously, and everyone was trying to get songs on the next Thriller album, on the next album that was going to be called Thriller. And our publisher had pitched Dance All Days, the demo, to Quincy, and I think they really liked it. And we heard that they were demoing it, but I think they were looking at all sorts of songs at the time, and they really liked it. But I think they felt the lyrics were just a little bit too left, too out there. So they we got this message through. Can you sort of rewrite some of the lyrics? So I think I think you were staying at my place at the time. Okay. And I think we had a bit of a session trying to write them, but it wasn't right. It just lost that sort of the spirit of the original song. Yeah. So it never quite made it, but it nearly got it.
Namafist and stuff. I'm like, what is this stuff?
Exactly. You know? And I remember we bumped into Quincy Jones in New York in a restaurant, and he, you know, he said, I love that song. I love Dance All Days. It wasn't all. It really happened. You know?
Yeah. That's great. And if you can keep it for yourself, but I could imagine.
It's a great thing that in a way it was. I suppose financially it would have been ridiculously good if it gone on that record. But you know, we've done very well by it, and it really put us on the map. That song. So I think in many ways it was a good thing that we kept it. And I know there are other people who wanted to do it. We heard, I think Diana Ross wanted to do it, and Joe Cocker, I think, wanted to do it. It got a lot of interest, you know.
I bet you that just blew you guys' mind.
It really did, It really
as young men to write a song that so many people, so many legends.
Really, really.
When did you come up with the lyrics? The lyrics have always been, to me, very mysterious and very exotic, especially growing up in a small town in Idaho, and I'm hearing this music, and it's just incredible.
Yeah. Sort of hard to say, you know, especially at that time for me, writing lyrics I was letting it come out of my unconscious, really, you know. I've thought a lot more about that in more recent times, you know, and I'm quite into Carl Jung, who's sort of psychiatrist, you know, who really put a lot of store in the unconscious and dreams, and that sort of world, in a sense, has a tremendous role to play in our everyday life, in a sense, you know. And so I think Dance All Days is very connected into that sort of world, you know. But in a conscious way, I think I was just, take your baby by the hand. was definitely influenced a bit by I Want to Hold Your Hand by the Beatles, you know.
Take your baby by the hand.
And I think I read somewhere about how the Beatles went, you know, from I Want to Hold Your Hand to much more kind of sexual kind of lyrics, you know, as a part of their growing up, you know. And I think Dancehall Days kind of tracks that from Take Your Baby by the Hand, you know, through through the second verse, where it's a bit more kind of sexual. And then the last verse is more kind of, you know, In a Mouth and Amethyst, you know, it's kind of like the bizarre sort of, when you're really close to somebody, the kind of, it is almost sort of psychedelic kind of experience. Intense experience being somebody, and so I think the lyrics are kind of conveying that in a sense, you know. But there's also, I think the thing about the dance halls was connected up with my dad, who used to play in these jazz bands that played in really old school dance halls in Gillingham, where I grew up, you know. And Dancehall Days has got this sort of nostalgic thing in it as well. I think people have always picked up on that. So, you know,
Totally.
when I knew and everyone we knew, you know, could believe in what was true, you know, like you could sing that lyric now probably and resonate with it, you know, when things these days seem so kind of hard to kind of make sense of, or, you know, there does seem like there was an age before when things were a little more cohesive.
When you, and everyone we knew.
Well, I always loved the We Were Cool on Craze.
We were cool on craze.
And when you're a kid and you're trying to pore over the lyrics, I mean, this was back in the day where you didn't have access to lyrics like your iPhone. You just pull it up and you know what the lyrics are. You'd hear it, and I thought you were saying Cool on Christ, and I was like, is this a Christian band? You know?
Exactly.
But like you just said, when you, and everyone we knew could believe, do, and share in what was true, I said, Dancehall Days. Love that.
Sharing what was true, I said.
Yeah.
Dancehall Days, it feels like you said a throwback to an idea of cohesiveness when we were together.
Yeah, exactly. I think it sort of has that. Again, wasn't terribly conscious. You know, I wasn't thinking of anything directly about that. But yeah, it helped. And I think in the videos that we did, especially the second, well, actually, we did 2 videos for that song.
Yeah, 2. Yep.
The first one was directed by this guy, Derek Jarman, who was a very controversial sort of filmmaker in this country.
He did The Queen is Dead, The Smiths.
Exactly, yeah. And he also made these movies. He made a movie about Caravaggio that was sort of like set in the current day as well as in the Renaissance and stuff, you know. And he was openly gay at a time when it was kind of, wasn't that easy to live like that through your art, like completely upfront about it, you know. And but he loved Dancehall Days, and he really got into that nostalgic thing, you know. And so the video that he shot, you know, had us all dressed in these kind of slightly 1920s things, playing violins.
We were so in phase.
And there's also some beautiful colour, really early colour movie footage that his father shot, I think, at I think it was one of the World Fairs.
That's all days long.
He's a little kid in some of those shots.
Exactly, yeah. And that was all his personal kind of footage. So we were very sort of privileged in a sense for him to let us use that, you know, and to create this nostalgic thing, you know. But when the guys at Geffen saw that video, they were kind of like, ah, because they wanted us to look like a rock band, you know, not like a guys playing violins and stuff, you know. So we reshot it in a slightly more rock band kind of way, you know. But even that still had this, we shot it in a place called the Café Royal in central London, and it has this kind of sense of dance hall, sense of, you know, the mirror ball and the, I don't know, and the twins and everything. Everybody's sort of dressed in a slightly period 1920s, 30s sort of way, you know. And the band, there's a band backing us, and they're all like a kind of 1930s dance band or something, you know. And so the nostalgia was always really, that's what the directors implicitly got about the song, you know.
And putting the suitcase down, and at the end it's kind of chasing after you.
That's all day.
Exactly, yeah.
Saying that you'll never get away from the... I always read it into it as you'll never get away from the memories that you've created. They'll always be with you.
I guess you're right. Mm-hmm.
I love the lyric also, take your baby by the ears and play upon her darkest fears.
Play upon her darkest fears.
Yeah.
Real poetry in this song that,
Yeah.
like you said, you get the third verse and take your baby by the wrist and in her mouth and amethyst.
And in her mouth an amethyst.
I'm like, what are these words? I would look them up. I actually looked a couple of these up in the dictionary.
Yeah. I used to like dropping sort of unfamiliar words into songs, like amethyst and stuff, which is partly, what you rhyme with wrist. Do you know what I mean? But it's like, I always kind of like that. And I like that in, Beatles lyrics and Bowie lyrics and stuff, when you had the kind of words that were quite hard to scan into a song, and because you've always got to get the stresses right when you're writing a lyric so that it sounds like conversational,
Right.
as opposed to, if you get the stresses in the wrong place, it can really sound lame, but then trying to get these more exotic words into place, I still do that.
For anybody to say that pop music isn't educational, I have proof that as a kid, I wouldn't have known what these songs meant without looking them up. But I also love "And in her eyes, two sapphires blue, and you need her and she needs you." And the repeating of that lyric, that's the part that just kind of goes into your heart.
And you need her. And she needs you. We were so.
That's interesting.
That's the moment for me as a kid where I was like, this song is different than anything I'm hearing on pop radio right now, because it's really getting under my skin. It's getting into my soul. I just always loved this song. I remember going out and trying to find the tape. And again, coming from a small town, you go and they would have maybe 20 of the big albums that were on the charts. So it took me a long time to track this down.
Right.
And it was cool because it was like this exotic treasure.
Yeah.
Once I finally got it, and I just poured over it. And I remember when I got the record, I put it up on my wall as a poster because I loved the album cover of Points on the Curve.
Now, what you're saying there, I think, is an important factor about music as we experienced it. This thing about you'd hear something on the radio, actually getting a copy of it was often not easy, And I always had to go to London to get my albums and stuff, But it did make it precious, and it made it part of a little sort of part of your identity, really, I think, in a way that the kind of supermarket accessibility of music these days takes that away a bit. Do you know what I mean? But then, having said that, I think there are some very interesting little scenes dotted around, the UK and the US sort of thing.
There's a good and a bad to everything, right? And the good is that they have more access to music than they ever have. I've told my kids a million times, if I had Spotify, I would have never left my room. It took me 20 years to get every Bob Dylan album and every Smiths album, every Presley album, and pour over this stuff and really take it in. And you guys have access to that like that.
Scrolling through it,
Yep.
And I think the other positive thing is that, like, here in Canterbury, there are young bands and musicians and stuff who are doing their own scene, who are pretty sniffy about Spotify and streamed music and all that stuff, and they use Bandcamp and stuff like that. But, it's like it really encourages people to try and, I think pop music is always about artists, again, trying to find a different way of saying maybe the same thing, but they're finding a different way to say it. And that puts the emphasis in a different place. And I think that's all to be encouraged.
For sure. Well, Dancehall Days came at a critical time for you and Nick, because you were on the verge of being dropped by your label, really needed a big hit.
Yeah.
I hear that a lot with artists who kind of pull it out of the fire. Like, I know that Bruce Springsteen, for example, was on the verge of losing his record deal when Born to Run happened. And I think that sometimes great art comes from trials, from trying times.
It does,
Tell me about that. Was that at all a factor?
Yeah, I never think that I was consciously, when I was in that classroom, I wasn't thinking like, shit, I've really got to come up with something. Do you mean? I do remember that being more the case when we were doing Everybody Have Fun Tonight. And I think that song reflects a certain, not desperation exactly, but, it's like, don't deviate from the hit record. Do you know what I mean? Don't be too clever here. Don't be too complicated. Do you know what I mean? But Dancehall Days, no, I think in a way what makes the song still stand up, if you like, is that I wrote it naturally, for want of a better word. I mean, I wasn't trying to contrive it to be one thing or another, and I was still experimenting with putting, like I say, the Little Feat with the Human League, if you like. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, all of that stuff. I was sort of melding things together. And I guess because I'd had this experience of going to music college and getting into classical music, I had a very broad overview of music, and composers like Stravinsky and stuff. I liked the way they did harmony and the spikiness of things. And I sort of saw that there was a relationship between that and punk and stuff. Do you know what I mean? It's like, so it was all very interconnected. And I think Dance All Days sort of carries all of that stuff with it, and is just a particular blend of all those elements.
Well, it's such a big part of pop culture. I mean, Bachelor Party and Pretty in Pink, Adventureland, Romeo and Michelle, Love You, Philip Morris, The Fighter, Grand Theft Auto, Vice City. That's been great to have it on that.
First time my son was impressed with me. He was like playing it. He said, "Dad, isn't that your song?" And he was like, I don't know, 10 or something. And he was like, wow, maybe Dad is cool after all.
Absolutely.
But it was a whole
good.
new generation of kids that got into that song.
Breaking Bad, too, to be on such a revolutionary TV show as well.
It's been on lots of TV shows.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's been incredible.
It's certainly just as popular almost 40 years later.
Yeah. I think with Dance All Days, I do recall that it was a worldwide hit, but it stayed on the charts, like in the UK and in the US, for quite a long time. It took quite a long time to go up, and then it took quite a long time to go down. And that, I thought, was always the sign of a song that had sort of proper life, if you know what I mean.
Staying power.
Yeah.
Well, in the new version, too, when I heard that, I saw the video on YouTube. Incredible. Love that.
Cool.
Tell me about re-recording it and just to end on the legacy of the song to you, what it means to you now, so many years later.
Well, I still like it. So that's that's kind of cool. But that last thing of recording it with an orchestra in Prague, that was very cool, And again, it's a nice version. I really like the video that we did for it as well. So that's a lovely memory. And being in Prague in the winter in this beautiful studio with this huge orchestra, and we were only in the studio for a day with the orchestra because obviously it's cost a fortune to have sort of 60 guys all on an hourly rate. Do you know what I mean? So we whipped through a lot of parts during that session. But that's how you do it. But Dance All Days is great for that. I'm just very proud that it's still part of the culture, that it has a sort of, like you said earlier on, some songs, have this kind of centrality to them, and I'm not saying it's like a Gershwin song exactly sort of thing, but I'm pleased that Dance All Days is in there with, the songs that are kind of really iconic for an era, but also have a life beyond that. And people do cover versions. And in fact, there was a lovely video on Facebook that came up quite a while ago now of a guy just playing it outside his apartment block it looked like it was in sort of Rio or something like that, or it was in Mexico or something. And he was just sitting with an acoustic guitar, just singing it really very cool, very relaxed, and it's lovely. Yeah, beautiful.
When you talk about Gershwin, there is a bit of a tie to it because of the dance hall and the and nostalgia, but also the tie to your father.
Absolutely.
It's really, really cool.
Yeah. Well, we did a re-record of it, actually. We had a re-record clause in our Geffen contract, that was, I think, just 5 years or something. So we were able to do it legally, So we re-recorded it. So sometimes you'll hear the re-record, sometimes you'll hear the original. But my dad played the saxophone parts, the da-ba-da-ba-da-da-da. Dance All Days. He played those sax parts on the re-record, which I've always feel very proud of. And when we're playing it live, we have, the saxes are on a sort of part of a backing track, so that's my dad playing those.
Oh, that's great.
So every time we're playing it live, he's there with us.
Dance all day long.
Thanks so much for watching. Leave us a comment about Wang Chung and Dance Hall Days. What are your greatest memories of this song and the year that it came out? I was a little kid running around the house playing Star Wars, listening to Wang Chung. Life was good. And make sure to subscribe below if you want to be a part of this community. Check us out on Patreon. All these things help us to keep the music alive, and that's the idea. Till next time, 3 chords and the truth, my friend.